Hello and welcome back to the Fullerton College Pre-Press class. This is Ben Hewitt, your instructor. This is part 3 of our video on PDF output details. So we last left off talking about the idea of embedding fonts and how it's important to include the font files, which can be placed inside the container file that is a PDF, just by clicking a little box that says, go ahead and include or embed fonts. Some fonts are not able to be embedded either because they are the trial version and you have to pay for the full version, or because they were sloppily made and aren't able to be put in. In either of these cases, you shouldn't be making a PDF with those anyways to print because you're either not paid for it or it's not worthy of print. So either it outputs or it's not worthy of output is the best way to look at that. Trying to make a PDF without the fonts is like trying to produce a car, but oh yeah, there's no motor available. So, the rest of it's good. Anyways, moving on. Subsetting fonts is a way to keep your file size a little bit smaller while still including the necessary fonts. By the way, let me go back and make a comment on here. One of the advantages of the PDF is the fact that it's able to embed the fonts so that the person on the other end receiving your file, whether it's someone reading it on their computer or someone printing it on a press, is able to see it exactly the way you sent it. That is the purpose of a PDF. Whether it's for print or not, the purpose is to be able to show someone a layout precisely the way you made it. So not including the fonts is kind of shooting yourself in the foot a bit, don't you think? So subsetting is a way of still doing that, but reducing the file size. And sometimes this is good enough for font restrictions, depending on what the restriction is that's been built anyways. Basically, if you're doing this, a font subset means you include the letters of the font necessary for printing the job, but not all the letters. Let's say, for instance, we made a PDF, which was my name or a business card for me, and the card simply says Ben. If I choose to subset the font, that means that you're on the receiving end. Sure, the font came with the file so you can print it, but you can't make any edits because literally the only letters included are B, E, and N to make up my name. Nothing more, nothing less. So that is subsetting. Some fonts are set to always subset. Certain type 3s and true types, some of them will always do that no matter what, even if you choose it or not, and they will only subset. That has to do with how they're programmed, and sometimes it's a safety or copyright feature built in. For those ones, you're just stuck doing that. If you send a subset font, the file will still print just fine on the receiving end. It's perfect. There are no issues. The issue comes with if somebody misspelled something. Again, let's go back to my silly pulled out of the thin air example here. If you're trying to just print my name, Ben, and someone misspelled it, and they spelled it ban, B-A-N, because they were typing too fast, and the A and the E key are right next to each other on the keyboard, right? Okay, not really. Maybe it's BRN or something. But anyways, if you get a misspelling and you need to go back and fix it, while Acrobat allows you to make those changes, if the font doesn't exist on that computer and it was only a subset font and you're only sending 3 letters and one of them is incorrect, you are out of luck. There's no way to fix that. Again, you want to embed all fonts. Whenever possible, do that. It's okay to subset if you're not worried about editing later on, but always embed the fonts. If you don't embed the fonts, it's not just the batteries not included. That's like a toy not included box. You're not getting what you need to make it happen. Anyways, Adobe-based RIPs will always use the font from the PDF and not the resident font at the RIP. That is important. Remember how I talked about my biggest fear is Times New Roman showing up incorrectly because so many people have so many weird little versions of it and variations that you never know if you're getting what you think you're getting or something that's a little bit different that's going to ruin your layout, screw up your typesetting, kick things to being cut off, shuffle your pages around if you have just a slightly wrong size spacing somewhere in a font. So if the RIP is based on Adobe and based on using PDFs, the RIP will automatically give right of way to any embedded fonts. That means that you will not have font substitution errors so long as the fonts have been embedded. Even subsetting is fine. So long as everything is there and you're sending a complete package, it's going to print correctly. At least the font will. So there are a few older rips that kind of predate the PDF thing. Yeah, they're still out there. You're always sure these things are extinct, and then you come across one and you have to figure out how to work with it. It's always exciting. But anyways, other than a few of those old rips which might try to use their local copy of a font, which can be disastrous, otherwise, they should all respect the fact that this font has been embedded and they will give the right of way to that font and use that one instead. Color management policies. Leave color unchanged is a good choice in general. Again, what do I like? I like things that don't do things. It's like trying to find medication without side effects, trying to find a software that'll process your design, but not add or take anything from it. Because you don't want to change it. In fact, it's our job to produce as close to what we've been given as possible. Anything that adds or takes away or alters in any way is in fact bad for business and bad for what we're trying to do. It's contrary to our goals. It's also possible to tag things for color management with no conversion. That basically says it will assign a working profile to non-profiled stuff, but it only uses one profile for everything, which is not great. Leaving color unchanged can be a good thing, depending on the press you're going to. Hopefully that helicopter is not too loud. It seems every single day here around this time in the afternoon, I'm recording this around 2 p.m., there is a French Augusta helicopter, like the one you see at the beginning of Jurassic Park when they're flying to the island. And every single day, late morning, it flies west over my house towards LA. And every single afternoon, it flies east over my house further inland. And I'm not sure where it's going or coming from. I suppose I could try flight tracker. Anyways, I guess it's gone now, so we can talk about printing again. So only using one profile for everything's okay. Ideally, you're using individual profiles per picture because sometimes the photographer or the graphic artist will have tagged things themselves that they want preserved a certain way. And if you try to override it with a setting, you are undoing their intent by overriding with a little checkbox. You can also tag only the images for management, and that's going to tag unclaimed images. You can convert to RGB or you can convert to CMYK, and it will convert everything to the destination profile. Not necessarily what you're looking for, but there is a time and a place for everything. Color rendering intent. We covered this last chapter, or 2 chapters ago, actually. Remember, relative colorimetric, perceptual, and default is relative colorimetric. Let's talk about these things. Perceptual means it's going to keep the relationships between the colors correct, or as close to correct as possible. It may change the color's actual values and change their actual LAB positions on the charts to make sure they all fit within the gamut. And it's going to change all the colors to try and make sure that they all stay in the correct harmony with each other. So you don't alter one and leave the other unchanged, because remember, humans like to compare colors to each other. We don't like to see them in isolation. So I like perceptual. It's not always my choice, and there's always a time and a place for everything. But if it came down to me by default, I would choose perceptual. But you lose accuracy to maintain a trueness within the image of the colors to each other. And I find that a better way of doing things. But again, we all have our own philosophies and our own preferences, and that's just my preference. Relative colorimetric changes the white space to match the white space of the destination space. Absolute colorimetric maps out of gamut colors to the closest possible in gamut thing. You get more accurate color towards what the original intent was. Like specific colors will match better that are out of gamut, but their relationship to the other colors is altered because they changed, but the other colors stayed the same. Kind of like moving away from home and going off on your own for a while, then moving back to your hometown, and you have that one friend who still lives there, and they're exactly the same as you remembered them when you were 15. It's like kind of weird because you've grown and you've changed, and here they are still doing the same thing, and your relationship's a little bit awkward because of that. That's my analogy for the colors. The colors that were out of gamut, they moved outside the ability to print in CMYK. And when they moved back in, they're changed, but all the other colors stayed the same. And now it's a little bit strange, and they don't quite match the way they used to match everything. But at least they are themselves as much as possible, right? Saturation, I do like their comment here. The saturation rendering intent is great for things like graphics and pie charts that use color brightly and graphically, and not something you want to use for reproducing photographs or reproducing illustrations. Those will show up weird looking, they'll be too heavy, and you won't get enough contrast or tonal reproduction to see anything. So saturation, again, great for pie charts, terrible for photos. Working spaces lets you choose from different ICC profiles on the system and choose one of them. Choosing none of these is basically the same as choosing leave color unchanged at the beginning. Sheet fed coded version 2 and US web coded swap version 2, those are kind of legacy. It's not showing up in this thing here, but the current standard that's most widely adopted in America is Grackle 7. Grackle 7 is also the most compatible color management or color profile to the G7 method, which is also the accepted method of excellence in the United States. So Grackle is what you're really going to want to choose if you're going to choose a color working space. There's also device dependent data. As I've always said, what you're trying to produce is going to depend greatly on what kind of machine it's going to go to later. What does that press want? What is that press good at and bad at? We're not trying to pitch a no-hitter here. We're trying to do the underhand floaty pitch of a parent to their kid so their kid can whack that ball to the park and you can both be happy about it. We're trying to give our presses what they need to succeed. So device dependent data means you can set things that are going to work for certain devices. For instance, you can preserve the UCR and black generation for pass-through if it was going somewhere else and they can handle it on their end for specifics. That's pass-through and it's not really necessary to do. Transfer functions can hold on to special effects from Photoshop. Preserving halftone info is important if someone is using specific special effects that use halftones in the project. If not, don't worry about it. And then there's color for press quality here. We're talking about device-dependent workflows again. Color management on here wants to be set to convert to CMYK. That'll tell the distiller to make a PDF using device CMYK, device RGB, and device gray. If you're working for a device-independent workflow, which is a workflow to create a file that's more generally usable rather than specific for a particular machine, then you want to tag everything for color management, and that'll make sure it's using an ICC-based color space. That means you're setting it up so somebody else can succeed, and that is important to do. In printing, there's competition between print shops, but there's also a lot of interconnectedness and a lot of partnership between print shops. And honestly, it's better for everyone if we try to make things as compatible as possible to the other guy. It honestly makes the overall business better. So don't try to make it harder for any partners or even competitors. Make it harder by being good. Don't make it harder by making files wrong. Anyways, ICC-based color space is going to make it easier to transfer to different types of presses. And then they can also apply profiles as needed when they go to different devices. That's letting, if you're output, sorry, the bird's actually distracting me. If you're going to outsource a file to print somewhere else, as is rather common in printing, say you want something done on a flexo press and your shop doesn't do flexo, you don't know necessarily what that flexo press is going to want. So you keep it a little more general by tagging for color management, and then you let the flexo shop handle the part of using specific profiles if they need to. One more page here, we'll finish up this video. The advanced options on Distiller. You can allow the PostScript to override the PDF settings. If you're going to do that, why are you making a PDF out of your PostScript in the first place? The PDF is a better version of the PostScript. Don't let PostScript replace it with its old self. That's silly. Also, you don't want to allow PostScript X objects. Leave that also unchecked. When we come back in our next video, we'll talk about the gradients and how the PDF is going to handle creating those in excruciating detail. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.